I'm convinced that the members of our Discord community are obsessed with sending us things to scare us out of our wits. I mean, I get the goose pimples all over just thinking about the title of this video.
What is it? Russia's most feared criminal. Mature audiences only. Oh, Lord. Well, we posted our last one, and it got a little dark, and people in the comments were like, here's a suggestion. It's the best Mr. Ballin video. So we were like, well, we have to watch that.
Or do we? No, the truth is, do we? Yes,
so.
I think we have to. Not only because we have respect for Mr. Ballin the man in general, so I want to be able to watch his videos. He has graced us with his presence in the comment section, which was absolutely insane.
When we first started, too, we were like, ah!
Yeah, so we have to be supporters of Mr. Ballin at all times. But because you guys want to see us react to it, we'll give it a shot. Russia's most feared criminal. Russia's most feared... I mean... Jesus.
I don't even know. It's got to be bad.
I mean, yeah, Shorty trying to shake this one off even. Yeah, I don't know what this could be other than just a wild MFer. What do you think?
I keep thinking of the meme compilations where it's like that dude is just holding on to a tree and he's letting the other guy punch him in the stomach like they're in Russia, and there's a bear like bouncing on the tree. I don't know why I was thinking like bears and alcohol being involved when it's Russia. That's probably a terrible stereotype.
I think of like the worst and most feared criminal in Russia might be a guy who goes around smashing all the vodka bottles so that no one can have any, and he's just like, ha ha!
Maybe he's like in a gang, like a
yes,
like a head. What do they even call a head member of the gang? What,
like the gang leader?
Yeah,
the leader
the
of the gang.
headmaster.
Dumbledore squad. I mean, honestly, Hogwarts did promote a gang mentality, like with their classes, like the Gryffindors. We wear red, dog. If I see you around this corridor wearing green, I'm gonna smack you up. Respect my block, son. I'm a Hufflepuff, you know, like.
No.
Hufflepuff straight piss on the wall. You know, they're the dogs, right?
No. Hufflepuff, what are they? No, they're badgers? Are they badgers?
I thought they were dogs. Anyway, Mr. Ballin, I don't even know how we got there, but Mr. Ballin is one of those guys who he gets me with the suspense all the time. And not only that, he will tell you a story that will give you breadcrumbs, but not enough for you to make any sure guesses what's happening, but you get clues that make you interested.
Mm-hmm. And then, like, if you think that you know, at the end, you're like, I never expected that.
He gets you.
So,
here we are. I'm ready for it.
I'm ready.
I think. Are you? Let's do it.
Today's story sounds exactly like an urban legend. It sounds too exaggerated, too grotesque, too terrifying to be real. But it is. This is the true story of the Bitsevsky Park maniac. Before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once or twice every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to help build the Like Button's new dresser they just got from IKEA, and as soon as you open it up, immediately find all the screws, strip them all, and then leave. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. Moscow, Russia, which is one of the world's richest cities, is home to more billionaires than any other European city. But if you travel just 10 miles south of Moscow's richest neighborhood, the Golden Mile, you will reach one of Russia's poorest neighborhoods, the southern Moscow suburbs. Nicknamed Jopamira, which means the asshole of the world, these suburbs
Wow.
used to be a thriving neighborhood with tens of thousands of working-class Russians and their families calling it their home. But after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, the money and the jobs in this area dried up completely, and even though the residents wanted to relocate and live somewhere with more opportunity, they couldn't. They didn't have the resources to leave, and so they were trapped. And since 1991, really nothing has changed in these suburbs. Today, there are still tens of thousands of now very poor Russian families that still live there, living in these totally overcrowded Soviet apartment buildings that are these big, square, identical-looking things that are literally falling apart. And most of the people who live in these suburbs either are unemployed or they work some dead-end job that barely pays them any money. The police in the suburbs are completely underfunded and, for the most part, are corrupt. And so crime over the years has really taken a dramatic uptick. Also, drug and alcohol abuse are completely running rampant in this part of the world. But despite their notoriously rough living situation in the southern Moscow suburbs, these residents do have one claim to fame, and that is the Bitsevsky Park. Bitsevsky Park is comprised primarily of a massive, lush green forest that is full of wildlife and beautiful streams and clearings, and it sits right on the southern edge of the southern Moscow suburbs. In total, the park covers a whopping 2,700 acres and stretches 4 miles from top to bottom, which makes it 3 times bigger than New York City's famous Central Park. Bitsevsky Park had always been a popular tourist destination for people living around Moscow, but after the fall of the Soviet Union, the park's popularity skyrocketed, specifically amongst people that lived in the southern Moscow suburbs. As their lives continued to become more bleak in the 1990s, they compensated by going to the park as much as they possibly could. They would take long walks in the woods, they would play chess with their friends along the peripheries on the park benches and tables, or they'd go cross-country skiing in the winter. Basically, year-round, this park became their escape from their miserable everyday lives. But that would not last. Starting in the early 2000s, something totally unexplainable and terrifying began happening in the park, specifically in the heavily forested area in the park. And eventually, this unusual event that was taking place got so completely out of hand that the residents of the southern Moscow suburbs stopped going in the park. They were literally too scared to go inside. The strange phenomenon began in 2001. From May to July that year, 10 people went missing after having been spotted either in or right around the outside of the heavily forested area inside of Bitsevsky Park. All of them were alone when they were last spotted, and all of them were men. Now, there was some precedent for people suddenly going missing in this part of Russia. Every now and again, people would try to flee these suburbs to try to make a better life for themselves somewhere else, but time and time again, they would just come back a couple of days or weeks later because it hadn't worked out. But when these 10 men did not come back in a couple of days or weeks, their families went to police and reported them missing. But unsurprisingly, the police did not launch an investigation. Instead, they accused the 10 missing men of just being drunk bums who probably wandered off somewhere, and whatever trouble they were in, it was their fault. Now, the families and the locals did not buy this explanation, but there really wasn't a better explanation. These men really had just kind of vanished. No one had any idea where they went. And so given the kind of general grim outlook on life that lots of people held in this area, people just kind of accepted that whatever happened to these 10 men happened, and there's nothing any of us can do about it.
Wow.
And they moved on. But in October of that year, so 2 months after the 10th man had gone missing in the park, another man went missing in the park. And then by the end of the year, 4 more men had vanished inside of the park. and all of them vanished under the same circumstances, last spotted alone in or around the heavily forested area in the park. The families of these 5 men would go to police. They would report their family members missing, but again, the police did not launch any investigation and blamed the missing people for being responsible for whatever happened to them. And then after that, the families kind of mourned the loss of these 5 men, not really sure what to make of it, and locals kind of gossiped about it for a little while and started to speculate about what might have happened to them and kind of lumped them in with the 10 other men that had gone missing. But after a while, when no new news came out about what happened to them, everyone just kind of moved on again. And unbelievably, this pattern would repeat itself for nearly 4 years. From 2002 to late 2005, 25 more people would go missing inside of Bitsevsky Park. 24 of them would be men, 1 of them would be a woman, although it wasn't clear if she was actually in the same category as the other 24 men, but regardless, that put the total number of mysterious disappearances inside of this forested area in the park up to 40. But still, the police shrugged it off, and eventually, so too did the local population. Everyone just kind of moved on, like this phenomenon wasn't happening, that people were not going missing in droves inside of this forest. But everything would change with missing person number 41. Because unlike the previous 40, this missing person would be found again. 63-year-old Nikolai Zakharchenko was a retired police officer who lived in a tiny apartment in the southern Moscow suburbs with his family. He was a classic Russian tough guy who chain-smoked cigarettes and drank lots of vodka. And even though he was well aware of the missing person phenomenon inside of this park, that wasn't about to stop him from doing the thing he loved, which was going on walks inside of this park. He figured whatever was out there, he could handle it. So one evening in November of 2005, Nikolai told his sister that he was going to go out for a walk in the park. But that night, he didn't come back, and so his family was very worried about him, but they decided they would wait until the next morning to see if maybe he showed up. But the following morning, when Nikolai did not show up, his family went to the police. But per usual, the police did nothing. A few days later, a local was walking fairly deep inside of the forest inside of Bitsevsky Park when they noticed well off the trail, off to the left side, there was something unusual kind of tucked in the underbrush. Now, this local was all alone. They had kind of a bad feeling about whatever this was, and so they called the police and they reported seeing something strange. And surprisingly, the police did actually come out and they went over to investigate, and they found this unusual thing was Nikolai Zakharchenko. He was lying face down, he was fully clothed, and he only had one injury, but it obviously had been fatal. He had a massive hole on the back of his head. This was not from a gunshot. This was from massive blunt force trauma. He had been struck so hard that literally the back half of his skull was blown clear off. The police searched the area in hopes they might find the murder weapon or some other clue as to what happened to him, but there was nothing. And so all the police could deduce was that Nikolai had obviously been attacked either by a person or group of people or even an animal, and that whoever his attacker was or whatever his attacker was had clearly snuck up on him, given the location of his injury. Now that the police had a body, and it likely looked like it was a murder, they could no longer ignore the fact that so many people had gone missing inside of this park, and it was looking like probably if they looked around the park, they might find more bodies. So the local police called in reinforcements from Russia's Criminal Investigation Department, and they came to the southern Moscow suburbs, and with the local police, they began searching every inch of this park, looking for more bodies, or just for any indication of who or what was behind this attack and behind all these missing people. But after several days of a very extensive search, where they looked everywhere in this park, all over the forested area, they found nothing. At the same time this huge police search was going down inside of Bitsevsky Park, news about Nikolai's death had spread amongst the southern Moscow suburbs, and people were now getting really scared. Before, the fear of the park felt kind of theoretical because there were no bodies. And so even though it seemed far-fetched, it did seem possible that maybe all these people were getting lost on their own, that they really were just drunks stumbling off. But now, with the discovery that one of these missing people had been horrifically killed, that made the danger associated with this park feel very real. And so it was around this time that most residents of these suburbs stopped going inside of this park in fear of whatever was out there in the forest. And they would forbid their children from going in, and they would tell their neighbors, don't go in the park. And they gave this evil thing that lurked in the forest that caused men to disappear and attacked Nikolai, they gave this thing a name. They called it the Bitsevsky Park Maniac. But despite the fear of this maniac causing so many people to avoid this park, and despite the massive police presence that was in the park constantly looking for bodies, looking for clues, and just generally patrolling the area, despite all that, people still continued to go missing in this park. Starting just a week after the discovery of Nikolai's body in November of 2005, all the way up to April of 2006, 9 more men would mysteriously vanish in the forested section of Bitsevsky Park. And just like Nikolai, just a couple of days after they were reported missing by their families, they would be found lying out in the middle of the park with the backs of their heads caved in. But unlike Nikolai, most of these 9 victims had been found with a glass bottle jammed into the hole in the back of their head, meaning almost certainly this was the work of a human, not some animal. By this point, almost no one was stepping foot inside of the park, because it was basically common knowledge that, a serial killer is obviously on the loose in the forest. But despite this, there were still some very stubborn people who continued to go inside of the park. And one of those people was 32-year-old Alexander Pachushkin. He had been born in the southern Moscow suburbs, and he still lived with his family in the same tiny apartment he had grown up in. It's safe to say Alexander's life had been more difficult than his peers. When he was just 4 years old, he fell backwards off of a swing, and when he sat up, he was okay, but the swing came swinging back and smashed him in the front of the head, causing brain damage. Now, his family did not have the money to send him to a hospital, and so when he stood up after getting struck and he was kind of able to walk around and he seemed okay, they determined he was fine and they didn't follow up. But Alexander was not fine. The injury had impaired his cognitive abilities, and years later, when he went to school, the other kids would bully him for sounding dumb. By the time Alexander was in high school, he felt like an outcast. He didn't have any friends, and he was miserable. But his grandfather, who lived in the same apartment complex as he did, he noticed this about Alexander, and he decided he would take him under his wing and he would look after him. And so the first thing he did is he asked Alexander to come over, and he taught him how to play chess, believing that would be something they could bond over. And when he taught Alexander the rules of this game, which are quite complicated, it was like it opened up the secret portion of Alexander's brain that had never been opened before. Alexander immediately absorbed all this information about chess and became a master of it practically overnight. Within a couple of days of being taught how to play, he was beating his grandfather virtually every time they played together. And so his grandfather was totally thrilled about this and was very proud of Alexander. And so he decided to bring Alexander down to Bitsevsky Park, where all these old men who were total chess masters were always playing chess on all of the park benches and tables. And so he brought Alexander down there and he put him up against all of these incredible players. And very quickly, Alexander was wiping the floor with them. And they loved him for it. He was their star. He was their prodigy. They totally adored him and they respected him. And when they found out he was getting bullied at school, they made a point of telling him that he would always have a place with them in this park. And so for Alexander, this was like the best moment of his life. He finally felt like he was accepted and he finally felt happy. And so over the years, even after Alexander's grandfather passed away, Alexander continued to go down to Bitsevsky Park to play chess virtually every day. And he kept going to the park to play chess, even when men began going missing in the park, including some of the men he played chess with. And Alexander continued going to the park to play chess even after bodies began piling up in the park. Alexander's mother was terrified for him and felt like he didn't understand the risk he was putting himself in by going to this park all the time. But every time she pleaded with him not to go, just take one day off from playing chess, Alexander would say, "Mom, I'm gonna be fine." And then he would leave anyways. In April of 2006, Alexander was 32 years old and worked for a local grocery store stocking shelves. By this point, at least 50 people had vanished mysteriously in the forested section of the park, and 10 bodies had been found. On the morning of the 12th of that month, Alexander showed up to the grocery store for his shift, and right away he noticed there was a new employee. It was this beautiful older woman he had never seen before, and Alexander, while he was confident playing chess, was not remotely confident around women. He had never had a girlfriend before. But he found himself looking at this woman across the store, feeling like she was different, that she was more approachable than other women. And so he told himself that day he was going to go up to her and he was going to say hi. And so all through his shift, he kind of awkwardly watched this woman from a distance, kind of building up his confidence. And then at the end of his shift, her shift was also ending, the pair walked outside at the same time, and Alexander was about to say something, but he just couldn't find his voice. And then he noticed this woman had put a cigarette in her mouth, but she was fishing around for her lighter, like she couldn't find it. And so Alexander jumped into action and pulled his own lighter out, and he held it out to her and said, "Hey, can I light your cigarette?" And so before long, the two were chatting, and they were walking together and smoking their cigarettes. And over the course of their conversation, Alexander would learn this woman was named Larissa Kolegina, and she was 48 years old, and she lived near Alexander's apartment. And so after they walked for a little while, they arrived in front of her apartment building, and at this point, Alexander knows she's about to go inside, and so he suddenly feels bold, and he asks Larissa, "Hey, do you want to continue walking around with me for a bit and maybe do a pass through the park?" Now, at this point, the Bitsevsky Park was totally not a place you would bring people to. This is a place that everyone in the area is basically terrified of. But for Alexander, Bitsevsky Park was like his happy place. And so naturally, if he's going to take a woman on a date, that's where he's going to bring her. And surprisingly, Larissa was very quick to say, "Oh, let's go to the park." And so the two, they lit up another cigarette and they walked across the road and they walked through the front gates of the park. Their first stop was the chess tables along the periphery of the park right outside of the forest. And the tables were totally empty. But at this point, that wasn't surprising given the fact that even amongst diehard chess players, really Alexander was the only one still willing to go back in there every single day. And so after seeing where Alexander spent all of his time, it seemed like it was time to turn around and leave. But neither Alexander nor Larissa wanted their date to end, and so they decided to light up another cigarette and then follow a walking path that kind of looped into the forest and came back out again. And as they entered the woods and got deeper and deeper into the forest, the chess tables that were behind them faded from view, and the sky began to get darker and darker as it was getting late. But the pair just kept on walking, maintaining their cheerful conversation. But at some point, as they talked and walked, the path below their feet stopped looking like the path they had originally set out on. Now they're stepping over broken logs and they're ducking under low-hanging branches, and it's not really clear if they're on a marked trail anymore. But neither of them bring it up. They just maintain their kind of light conversation and continue walking as if nothing's going on. However, they both definitely began walking faster and faster to maybe speed up this loop. But at some point, when it was very obvious they were no longer on a path, they both came to a stop. As they had walked, Alexander had been in front, and so when they came to a stop, he turned around and he looked at Larissa, and right away he could tell there was just something wrong about her. There was a look on her face that just didn't look right. She looked exhausted or sad or something. And then as he's looking at her, she inexplicably kind of collapses into a tree right next to her, and she grabs the tree with her arms, and she slides down to its base, and she presses her cheek and her chest up against its bark, and she begins to cry. Alexander has no idea what's going on, so he just stands there staring at her. And in between sobs, Larissa looks up at Alexander and says, "You're the maniac, aren't you?" Alexander couldn't believe it. She was the first person to figure it out so quickly. Normally, he would have to tell his victims before he killed them. And so he smirked and he looked at her and he said, "Yes, I am." And so Larissa, at this point, she lets out this huge sob and she looks down and she keeps crying. And then she looks back up again at him and she says, "Are you going to kill me?" And without any hesitation, Alexander looks at her and he says, "Yes, I am." And then he reached into his jacket and he pulled out a hammer. No one knows for sure why Alexander became a serial killer or why he almost exclusively targeted men. Many people believe it might have something to do with the brain damage he suffered as a 4-year-old when that swing hit him in the head, that somehow that rewired his brain and made him more aggressive towards other people, especially men. But that's just speculation. And other than that injury, there really isn't much in Alexander's life that stands out as a big red flag. He just kind of floated about his life and followed the crowd. But in 1992, when he was 18 years old, he got this urge to kill, and he actually decided to act on it. He brought up this desire to a classmate of his named Mikhail Odachuk, and surprisingly, Mikhail says to Alexander, "I want to kill someone too. Let's do it together." And so the two met up a couple of days later and they headed off to Bitsevsky Park and began walking around the forest looking for a lone person that could be their victim. And as they're walking along, Alexander, he's fully committed, but he can tell Mikhail is not. He's starting to get cold feet and he's talking about, maybe let's stop for now and head back and maybe do this another time. And Alexander, he's getting more and more angry and frustrated with Mikhail until finally Alexander decides, my first victim will be Mikhail. And so he turns to Mikhail and he says, "You know what? If you want to head back, you can." And Mikhail says, "Okay, maybe we can do this another time, right?" And Alexander says, "Sure." And so Mikhail turns around, and as soon as his back is to Alexander, Alexander pulls out his hammer and he smashes Mikhail in the back of the skull, causing Mikhail to crumple to the ground, either dead or unconscious. But either way, he's laying on the ground. And as soon as he is, Alexander remembers that they had passed a little while earlier this well kind of hidden in the middle of the forest. And so he grabbed Mikhail's body and he dragged him through the forest over to this well. And when he got to the well, he pulled the lid off of it, and then he picked Mikhail's body up, pushed him up and over the edge, and dropped him inside. And Mikhail fell 30 feet all the way down to the icy water below. And then Alexander put the lid back on the well, he grabbed his hammer off the ground, and he left. An important part of Alexander's killing was this well. This well was not a drinking water well. It was basically an access point to this deep underground sewer system that stretched all around the underside of this park. And so when Mikhail fell down this 30-foot shaft, he didn't just land at a pit of water right at the bottom of the well. Instead, he fell all the way down the shaft until it opened up like the bottom of a huge scientific beaker. It was basically like this big cave at the bottom of the well that was full of very deep water. And so Mikhail would have splashed into that water, which was icy cold, and then after Alexander put the lid on top of the well, it would have been pitch black inside of that space. Now, even if it had been lit up, there was no ladder for Mikhail to climb back out of. And there was a current running through this well because there were tunnels leading into it and then out the other side. And so Mikhail, if he woke up, if he was conscious when he hit the water, he would have immediately been swept into another tunnel. And many of the other tunnels that led away from this cave space were completely filled with water. And so he would have had nowhere to breathe. He would have been sucked into a tunnel and he would have drowned. And so whether Mikhail died from the strike on the back of the head or whether he drowned, we don't know. But he died after being thrown in the well. And then his body was swept miles and miles away to some deep underwater recess where nobody was looking. Alexander would wait another 9 years before he killed again. But once he started up again, he didn't stop. His first kill after the hiatus was in the summer of 2001. His victim was a man he liked to play chess with. In fact, this was a man that loved Alexander and was definitely one of Alexander's friends. They regularly played chess with each other. And one day in May, after a game of chess, Alexander asked the man if he wanted to head into the forest to pay respects to his dog, who he had buried out in this forest. And he told the man he was going to have a sip of vodka over his dog's grave. And so this chess friend of his agrees to go with Alexander because he loves Alexander. Alexander, he's a good friend of his, and says, absolutely, let's go pay our respects to your dog. And so the pair begin walking into the forest, and at first they're on a trail, but eventually Alexander says to this man that you need to leave the trail in order to get to the gravesite. So the man says, yeah, no problem. And so they get off the trail and they're walking for a little while until they reach the well. And when they get to the well, Alexander stops and he kind of points to some arbitrary spot on the ground and says, oh, that's where my dog was buried. And so Alexander pulls out a bottle of vodka and he takes a swig, and then he hands it to the man, who does the same thing to kind of do this commemorative drink for this dog. And then afterwards, Alexander looks at his friend and kind of gestures with his arm to get the man to, take them back out of the forest, back out to the chess tables. And so the man turns around and begins backtracking. And as soon as he does, and his back is to Alexander, Alexander pulls out his hammer, he walks up behind his friend, and he smashes him over the back of the head. And then just like Mikhail, he drags this man's body over to the edge of the well, he pulls the lid of the well off, and then he lifts this man up, and he dumps him into the well shaft, and then he puts the lid back on top. Alexander continued to lure his victims out to that well, and all of his victims were people he knew. They were his chess friends. They were his neighbors in his apartment complex. They were anyone he had a personal relationship with. He would later say that that was his preferred victim. He liked to know the person he was killing. It made him feel like God. Amazingly, it would turn out not all of Alexander's victims who were chucked into that well actually died. Victims number 16 and 17, who were a pregnant woman and a 13-year-old boy respectively, after they had their heads smashed with a hammer and they got chucked into the well, their clothing got caught on a snag poking out of the inside of that 30-foot shaft, and it literally arrested their fall and kept them from plummeting all the way into the water. And somehow, in both instances, Alexander didn't notice. He just put the well lid back on and walked away, believing they were both dead. But they weren't, and after they regained consciousness, they were able to kind of claw their way back up the well shaft and pulled themselves out of the well. Both victims would go to the police, and both of them would positively identify who their attacker was, Alexander.
What?
But the police didn't care. In fact, they told both of these victims that they needed to drop the charges and leave them alone. And if they didn't, they, the police, would come up with something to have both of them arrested, the victims. And so Alexander got away with it, and the victims were literally intimidated by the police to stay quiet. And so that led to dozens and dozens more murders. In April of 2006, after Alexander told Larissa he was the maniac and he was going to kill her, he walked behind her as she cried and continued to hold on to the tree, and he wound up his hammer and brought it smashing into the back of her head. And then as she slumped to the ground, he hit her several more times in the back of the head with the hammer, and then he pulled out a vodka bottle and he jammed it inside of the hole, and then he left. 2 months later, Alexander would lure another woman out into the middle of the forest with him. Her name was Marina. She was 35 years old, and she had met Alexander while working at the grocery store with him. She actually was hired to work at the grocery store to fill Larissa's now vacant spot. Before Alexander and Marina began their walk out to the park, which was Alexander's suggestion, Marina said she just needed to stop by her apartment to let her son know where she was going. And so they swung by her apartment. Marina went upstairs and she left a note for her teenage son saying where she was going and who she would be with, and she even left behind Alexander's name and his phone number on this note. And so when she came back out again and she and Alexander began walking towards the park, Alexander knew that if he killed her, which was his intention, that he would certainly be caught. The police were on super high alert at this point, and they would certainly get their hands on this note, and that would absolutely implicate him, and so he didn't really know what to do. But by the time they were strolling into the forest, Alexander had decided he was going to kill her anyways. And many people believe he did this specifically to get caught, not to protect the public from himself, but because he wanted fame. He wanted recognition for what he had done. This theory stems from the fact that starting with his 41st victim, Nikolai Zakharchenko, Alexander began leaving his victims' bodies out in the open. He stopped putting them into that well. And he wouldn't just leave them out in the open. He would prop them up in strange poses against trees, and he would jam glass bottles into the holes in the backs of their heads, indicating he wanted the police to find them. That way, he could get all the credit he believed he deserved. When the police did finally arrest Alexander, they searched his apartment and they found this notebook. And in this notebook was a picture of a chessboard. Now, a chessboard has 64 squares on it, and in Alexander's notebook, this chessboard had 62 of the 64 squares filled in. And Alexander would explain to police that that was his scorecard. He had 62 victims. It would turn out 2 of those people had actually survived, the pregnant woman and the 13-year-old boy, but still, there were 60 murders accounted for in this notebook. Alexander would be fully cooperative with police and would tell them every detail he could possibly remember about every single killing, including what conversations were like with the person he killed right before he killed them. He would also often reenact what he did to the person and how he felt afterwards. It was very clear that Alexander was reveling in the attention he was getting from law enforcement, and it was very clear that he loved talking about killing. Ultimately, the police were only able to gather enough evidence to charge Alexander with 49 murders, not 60. And when Alexander heard this, he was totally disappointed, and he asked the judge if he could get credit for the other 11 murders to maintain his 60 victim mark. The judge said no. During his trial, Alexander was deemed to be such a threat, he was kept inside of a glass cage the entire time. And during the proceedings, he showed no remorse and in fact seemed kind of happy, like he was enjoying the spectacle of his trial. He was ultimately given the harshest penalty under Russian law at the time, which was life in prison without parole, and the first 15 years of his life sentence would be in complete and total solitary confinement. So virtually no human interaction, kept inside of his cell 24 hours a day with nothing in his cell all day long. Alexander is still alive today, and he is still in solitary confinement. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please offer to help build the Like Button's new dresser they got from IKEA. And as soon as you open it up, take all the screws out, strip them all, and then leave.
How have I never heard of that?
I mean, there's a lot of crazy international true crime
60
stuff.
people?
Yeah.
You know, like John Wayne Gacy, it was like 33 people. And that's astounding. This double.
Yeah, but he was living in a quasi-failed state. You know, Russia was falling apart. I mean, it was a bad situation. So the police presence is not there. And then you've got somebody with brain damage who was picked on and an outcast.
The biggest thing is the police presence, like you said, and it's ridiculous that those 2 people crawled out of the well. A kid, a 13-year-old kid, and a pregnant woman, and the police were like, you know what, you can go fuck yourself, and actually don't waste our time, or we're going to harass you.
Yeah, you keep bothering us, we're going to
not do our job and fuck you up.
Put charges against you.
Like, that could have saved so many lives.
It's crazy.
And it just pisses me off. I wish his grandpa would have never taught him how to fucking play chess. Maybe that...
No, it would have been somebody else. It would have been some other way to access people. Because he had already killed somebody by that point.
Oh,
Remember? Him and his friend?
Well, I don't know if the timing lines up, but
no, they were in school at the time. It was his friend from school. So it wasn't like he took him there to play chess.
They were talking about him and how he wanted to approach the girl. And I was like, go you with the cigarette.
Like he was going to be the victim, you know?
Well, no. Oh, yeah, that's how they were hyping it up. And then he was like, let's go to the park. And at first I was like, okay, what woman would be like, you know what? Let's go on a date at this park, even though the victims were mostly male. Still, just like, I'm not going to go with some strange dude to this park.
Right.
So, I had like a 2-second, like, oh, no, he might be. And I was like, no, he's not.
He was.
He was.
He was. And, you know, you look at stuff like the Gacy situation and Ted Bundy. Like, Ted Bundy, the end of him would have been you know, who knows if the police hadn't have tried.
Oh yeah, he would have.
I mean, they were trying to find him and having a hard time.
Well,
and even when they did catch him, he broke loose
a couple of times.
So I mean, it's like, imagine had the police just been like, "Fuck off."
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been in the hundreds.
Yeah.
He would have never stopped.
No.
And people are just broken in that way sometimes. You know, it's a very anomalous situation, but when it happens, it's just like, good God. I mean, those people, that's the only time that like the death penalty seems like an option to me, is when you have these people who are just, I hate to say it this way, but they're like this extreme, dangerous error in the code where they seek nothing but to hurt people.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like, they don't want that.
Right.
Nobody wants to be that. But it's pretty obvious to me that they can't control themselves.
Right. Yeah. And you and I usually differ on stuff like that. But when it comes to situations like this, I mean, that guy wanted to. He even said, like, oh, the 50-some counts. And he's like, can I get my credit? Your credit?
The dude that went ham at the Dark Knight movies, the Aurora situation, that guy had a similar thing where he had like a point system, or you know, there's some people in this situation who believe that they're compiling like servants in the afterlife, or there's some kind of score. I mean, obviously,
right,
they're whacked out.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Obviously, they're whacked out.
I worked at a movie theater when that happened, and I had to go to work the next morning, and I was terrified that somehow that would, you know.
My OCD was pretty bad at that point, and I remember making myself go like 3 times to overcome the fear of going to a movie theater, because I have issues with OCD and catastrophizing about things.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I'm not going to let media coverage and an individual who's just outside of it like rob me of something that I enjoy, which is going to the movies. There's wild ass people, and if there's a situation where, you know, obviously you shouldn't be going to an area because there's like an active threat, then don't.
Dude, and he was
don't
like,
go.
His mom was like, I want you to be safe. And he's like, I'll be fine. And I was like, oh no, he's going to die. And yeah, no, he was fine. He was going to be fine. That's just,
I don't know if you consider his state fine, but.
Well, he wasn't murdered.
No.
Which I'm kind of like surprised, because I think of Russia as being like really harsh. Like, so I just imagine that he would have gotten the death penalty. Do they have the death penalty? I don't know how that works. Because like here, that guy would have gotten. In
comparison to complete void of anything.
For 15 years.
Death would be the easier option. They probably torture you in lieu of death. They probably feel like some crimes are so heinous that death would be a mercy situation. So I could imagine that he is in a very small containment area where his only option is probably to stand up and nothing all the time. So I would imagine that guy is in living hell right now.
Right.
Especially with a broken mind. You know what I'm saying? This is just a horrific situation all the way around. You know, the thing that I think of, which is tragic, is these people were already living in a shitty environment, in a really crappy situation. A lot of them seem to be kind of elderly people that were out there playing chess.
I know.
You know, it's finally their time to at least try and chill just a little bit.
In a beautiful place.
You know, just
to escape.
Right. And that's the last thing that they lived, was complete horror and pain. You know. So, what a monster. What a terrible scenario. But I hope at least the families, you know, got some kind of peace out of knowing where. Because the absence of knowledge sometimes could be horrific in and of itself. I couldn't imagine if something happened to you and I just did not know where you were.
At all. Yeah. Yeah, you can't grieve that way.
Yeah. So There you go. I'd never heard of this. Pretty wild stuff. Shame on the police.
Yes.
Like, big shame on the police. I believe they were bigger monsters in this scenario than him. He was a broken person. They were sworn.
Wait a second. If they done all of this crazy search, they should have searched the well.
But once something went into the well, it was taken off.
But, like, I mean, I don't know what technology they had then, but you can... a camera or something?
Oh, no. No.
Well, then it's like the perfect place for
yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah. Even if they had found something, the fucking lady that was pregnant and the kid, like, it had to be undeniable proof, which is what he left.
Yeah.
So awful, disgusting, disturbing. Mr. Ballin, ladies and gentlemen, finding some of the weirdest stuff. And also you guys, the people in our Discord community recommending this shit.
Please watch this.
Watch this. We have. Thanks for the nightmares.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
It's one of those things that's like, wow, now that I know that, it makes me almost weary of being nice to strangers. You know, like sometimes I go out of my way and I'm like if I see someone... a situation like you play a lot at bars and stuff and they don't talk to people, like I try to go out of my way, and you do too, to be kind to people. And then it's like, oh, well, there's people who are like, I want to know my victims and you were nice to me, so now I'm going to do this horrific thing.
They're shitty people, but this goes beyond the level of just being a bad person. Like, you have to have several layers of humanity broken to be able to pull some shit off like this. A lot of times you'll see, like, I've watched interrogation videos and shit, and people who end up in scenarios where they've done something fucked up, who aren't just completely broken on multiple levels, can't handle it. They can't handle it. I mean, you have to not have certain wires connected to just be okay with it.
Right.
Like, even people who, in the heat of passion, you know, they've gotten mad at their spouse for cheating or whatever.
They feel bad about it. Yeah.
Even if they're like, good, that person's out of the equation, they're still like, oh my God, I've done this. Oh, even if it's a self-preservation thing, that guy didn't fucking care.
No.
He wouldn't, like, to be as brazen about it, just like the Gacy shit that we were watching that just came out on Netflix when he was talking to his lawyers, like,
oh, yeah.
You know, well, you know, to a certain degree,
They're mine.
Well, he was talking about buying people and stuff like that.
No, but he was even upset whenever they were taking the bodies out of the home. He said, you shouldn't be allowed to do that. They're mine.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, no, they're not. What is wrong with you? I mean, I know what's wrong with you, but no.
But he wasn't guilty or disgusted or ashamed. He was just like, I'm
Matter
me,
of fact.
So this is all good, you know? Like, levels just completely missing.
Yes.
So when you're interacting with people and you're like, whatever here, and you don't get to that point where you're going to see those levels. So that's why you have your circle of people that you trust that are tight, but then you have this layer that is good and just nice to people and whatever. There's nothing wrong with having that.
Yeah. Distance.
It's oh yeah, I'm going to come to your house. Oh yeah, we're going to walk through the woods. It's like being out and around is fine, but being your guard, being able to drop your guard around people you just meet completely. That's why it was always weird to me at parties and stuff. People like, oh, try this, or like, you know, smoke this or take this. And I'm just like,
I don't know you like that.
I just met you, and the guy that introduced us, I don't trust him even. So, nice to meet you. Fist bump.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I've always been super paranoid. But it's probably kept me out of a lot of crusty situations.
For sure.
You know? So, maybe you should think about that too if you're out there.
And we're not victim blaming. We're just saying it's good to be precautious.
Oh,
this could happen to anyone.
I'm not victim blaming.
Yeah.
I'm saying that to honor these people, don't go down the same way that they did. Because I guarantee you a lot of them, if they were able to live to tell you, they would probably say, you know, please God, stay away from the faith that I found, in any way that you can. I know that experiences that I've had where I have made it that have been scary, I would caution people to never walk in my shoes to even come that close to a bad situation. So it is bullshit, though, that I read all these stories and I hear all these stories about, like, parks and, like, stuff like, it's like, damn it, dude. Like, those are some of the chillest places.
Yeah. I even get a little creeped out. It was the last time that we went to one of the bigger parks around here. And there's this one part, it's like kind of shady, a big forested area, a little swampy. And it's like there's so much coverage, it's almost dark right there, no matter what time of day it is. So even me being out in a very safe area, I would say, where I know nothing has happened, I couldn't imagine being like, okay, 50 people have gone missing, still got to get...
Still going.
I could just... That's so
the first
scary.
one, I'm walking through there like Blade. I've got a sword. You grab it, it's gonna get you. I got, I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm walking in there prepared. I got nunchucks, like the chicken version of JonTron. Nunchucks.
Yeah.
I don't
know.
I'm ready to go to war at that point. But around here too, that's the thing. The police presence on that situation would be like Independence Day,
because there's nothing else going on. So they're
right. There would be people in ghillie suits, like, floating on the lake, just waiting for an opportunity to, these people are just strapped, ready. And
it's not a largely populated area where we're from.
No, but populated enough.
Yeah.
And that was a big thing that surprised me in this scenario, because the population in and around that area had to have been massive. You would expect mobs of people to just be like, all right.
Yeah, I know. Now that you say that.
Yeah.
Especially
because the rednecks around here would band together to, like...
Oh, yeah.
There'd be militias. It'd be an unstoppable militia of hillbillies ready to whip somebody's ass.
Yeah. I'm sure there were people, I'm sure that did happen.
I don't know. A very crazy story we could speculate on till the end of time. The genie's in the bottle on this one. The monster has been caged. And pretty much fuck that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate that that's how he felt about people.
You know how many times I've been hit in the fucking forehead? Dude, I can remember a time... I can remember a time running full speed away from my friend, and he accidentally stepped on the back of my shoe, and I fell forward, and then he fell forward behind me and headbutted me, and the front of my head hit the concrete. You know how many times I've eaten shit face first on the concrete, skateboarding and shit? I was a kid. I was probably 8 when that happened.
Yeah, it wasn't like he was a baby, because it's not like his head was
I played football from the age of 7 to 18. Professional wrestling,
but
binge drinking.
You do have.
I'm not as quick-witted and
not traumatic brain injury, but
no,
I've had concussions
and I've had some damage.
But a traumatic brain injury, especially like in your frontal lobes, when you're 4 years old, it can do some stuff. That's like...
I stand by the fact that there's been a lot of people who have been through a lot of things and a lot of damage.
There are people...
And they don't decide to lash out and hurt people.
It does not matter if you... There have been people on accounts where adults, they'll be like the best people ever, and they'll get into a car accident, and they fuck up part of their frontal lobe, and it's like completely the opposite.
All right. So check this out.
You don't get the choice.
Check this out. What was it that the people who had to suffer because of him did to make me need to give a fuck about what happened to him to make him do that?
I'm just saying that I feel bad that happened to him, and I hate that that's how he felt about other people.
I feel even worse for all the victims of the bullshit that he decided to perpetrate.
I do too.
So, regardless of what his situation was, fuck that guy. That's my opinion.
I totally stand with you.
It sucks. Like I said, it sucks for him. It sucks even worse for everybody else. But Mr. Ballin, always ballin', shot calling, 20-inch blades on the Impala. Okay. Giving us another really crazy story. You guys should check out his channel if you haven't. If you haven't checked out Mr. Ballin, this is your first exposure to him, please have him expose himself further to you by going to his channel, which will be down in the description, and check out all those awesome videos that he has on there, because geez, what a storyteller.
Yeah.
He comes up with some crazy stuff. We know you love him. If you don't, you need to learn how to. Hopefully you appreciated our reaction to this. If you did, you can like this video. You could subscribe to our channel. Well, you could even hit the notification bell, and when we upload videos, ba-ding, it'll show up.
Hopefully we get to 2 of those a day. That's what our goal is. So you'll get
dropping the deuce on you every day.
Upload every day. And if you have any recommendations, it can be true crime, it can be funny memes, it could be animal videos, whatever. You can leave that in the comments below or on our Discord, and we'll have a link to that in the description, as well as Mr. Ballin's original video.
And we live stream. We do that every Monday and Thursday evening at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. You could join us there. It would be great. Like Nikki was saying, the Discord community is pretty awesome. You could join that and join in on our videos. We do community game night the last Thursday of every month. So you could be in on that. We like to have fun. Be good to see you there. But I think that's going to do it for this video.
See you guys.